Hello, welcome to the Nomiki Show. I am Nomiki Konst. Well, it really hit me today. The bottom line issue of this election. It is not the pandemic or law and order or even Donald Trump's fascism and narcissism. It isn't even whether we can put this country on a progressive path, as important as that is to so many of us right now. The core issue right now is reality. Do you believe that there is a reality? Do you believe the government ultimately has to deal with reality? Or are you so deep down the post-truth rabbit hole that reality is just one more thing to manipulate to get what you want? I'm not mentioning any names here, but you know who I'm talking about, Mr. President. These interviews Donald Trump gave to Bob Woodward are amazing. Now remember, Bob Woodward is no Tarbell or I.F. Stone. He is no progressive muckraker or relentless investigative reporter. He is the ultimate elite Washington insider, establishment, lamestream, corporate media icon. Which shows that Donald Trump is so out of touch with reality that all you have to do to get him to derail himself is put a tape recorder in front of him. And that is what Woodward did 18 times. We now have recorded testimony from Donald Trump himself of his own malfeasance in this pandemic. Trump told Woodward that he understood the lethal threat of the coronavirus in early February, when there was still time to have made a difference. But instead, Trump refused to sound the alarm. He denied in public that he even acknowledged it in these private conversations with Woodward. Now, it might have been helpful if Mr. Woodward, hero of Watergate, had shared a bit of this, with the rest of us back in February, like a reporter would. But this is bigger than our judgment of Bob Woodward for his creepy insider journalism. He could have sounded an alarm, but others could have too, and should have. Where was the rest of the media? Trump knew what he knew because experts told him, and those experts were available to real-life journalists. Oh, hey, they were even available to Democrats too. So where was the opposition party then? There was a reality out there in February. Trump knew it and manipulated it, disassembled it. He flat out lied. But we need to stop pretending that simply calling Trump out for this, calling him Mr. Make Matters Worse, is an adequate response to actions and inactions that have cost nearly 200,000 lives in this country. Will Democrats step up? Will Biden step up? Let me separate 2 points here. People are rightfully angry that Biden is not going left. But many of us are even angrier that the campaign is nowhere to be found right now. The country is in crisis. It's on fire. It's drowning. It's sick. The president is lost in post-truth space. But Joe Biden's campaign is frozen, afraid of how Donald Trump will react if they attack him head on. So they do nothing or way too little. And if we sit here wondering if Biden is really feeling what the rest of us are feeling, Karl Rove, the Republican Karl Rove, wrote something important today. He said Biden's appeal to national unity resonates deeply with many Americans. Okay. But, and this is the but about Joe Biden, Karl Rove then said, quote, appeals to unify have been most affected when tied to a clear direction. So I want to know, what is Joe Biden's clear direction? He doesn't have much time. I've got more to say about this campaign, and it'll go on and on. But the big thing is, why is the Joe Biden campaign without offices in some battleground states? Literally, he has no offices open in swing states right now. And why did it take Susan Sarandon, our pal, to discover the Biden campaign website was so out of date it was still recruiting phone bankers for the primaries 6 months ago? Wake up, Sleepy Joe. Oh my God, I can't believe I just said that. But it shows how Trump can get in our heads. And as Michael Brooks used to say all the time, Donald Trump is no idiot. He is brilliant at this game. So my question is, when at war, do we just stop fighting because you think your opponent has more weapons? Okay, enough of that. Here are some of today's top stories on my feed. This one we're going to talk about in the show a little bit later. Citigroup has its new feminist comrade. Jane Fraser has been named CEO of Citigroup, one of the country's largest banks. How did the New York Times banner this news? I got the alert on my phone this morning. Quote, Wall Street's longest enduring glass ceiling is about to be broken. I can't make this stuff up. Longest enduring glass ceiling? So Everything is great now for all these women who work in the bank's cafeteria, or as what they now call executive assistants. And how about those contract cleaning crews, cleaning women who come in at midnight to mop up behind all of the banking bros? Is sexism over? This will be news to thousands of American women who still face the gender pay gap, who cannot access reproductive rights or pay for necessary medications because they lack health care, who receive no support for childcare, and who are forced to face domestic violence because they have no housing alternatives right now. We will see if Citigroup executive Jane Fraser is on our side, right? She could start with an examination of loan policies towards women entrepreneurs. Today in housing justice, the evacuation of thousands of people in Oregon in response to these massive spread wildfires. Many of these people won't have homes to come back to. Our commodified housing system has left us unprepared for a sheltering crisis unlike anything we have seen since the Great Depression. And austerity has caused slim funding for home services across the country, and those facing greater exposure during this pandemic, this global pandemic, are put at even a greater risk. So what we need is a robust national movement to guarantee a sustainable home alongside full funding of programs to support those experiencing homelessness or displacement before they find permanent place to. We will have more on wildfires and climate change a bit later in our first ever Which Side Are You On segment. You do not want to miss this. It's going to be an ongoing segment. But we have an amazing show. This is something we're going to do every single week. We'll just surprise you. We're going to be talking about feminism and class. Ellie Mae Hogan is in the house, or Miss Ellie Mae, as she's known to her Twitter followers. We will talk to her about the new CEO at Citigroup and much more from the front lines of the gender equity fight. Notice I did not say that was in the past tense. And later we will have our first radical feminism panel with Jamie Peck from the Antifada and, of course, the Majority Report, and the chair of the Rose Caucus, Violet Ray. All of that is coming up next. Don't forget to click that like button, smash it, smash it, smash it. Vote early and often. We're here for you to vote twice. Post us, tweet us, you know, all the whole jam. And of course, if you are able to, please join us on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. We cannot do this show without your support. We will be back right after this with Ellie Mae Hogan and Which Side Are You On? Thanks for watching and listening to The Nomiki Show. But remember to click like and subscribe on YouTube, and please share on social media. If you're not already a patron, please join us for as low as $5 a month on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show for early and special content. That investment makes a huge difference. We are not corporate media raking in the dough. It's really you guys that are keeping us going. So please consider being a patron. And to our current patrons, thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful to you. We also now have swag. So check us out on thenomikishow.com to get your mugs, your totes, and your stickers. And now, introducing a new feature here on the Nomiki Show, which just went daily. Which side are you on? If wavering, waffling, and fence-straddling make your blood boil, then this is the place for you. Today, we ask California Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom, which side are you on? As fires rage across the American West, and at noon in San Francisco looks like a midnight hellscape, and temperatures in Los Angeles hit peaks beyond anything felt before, Colorado is at 90 degrees, snowing the next day back to 100 degrees. Let's show the quick tweet of Governor Newsom, what he said. As all of this is going on, Governor Newsom tweets, quote, "We do not have time to deny the reality of climate change." Can we play his video?
You can see close to just shy of 2.3 million acres have been burned this year. As it relates to the issue of climate change, we are experiencing unprecedented confluence of issues this year that we did not experience last year. Unprecedented record temperatures, a heat dome that impacted the entire west coast of the United States, not just a few states on the west coast. We are dealing with the reality of some 14,000 lightning strikes over a 72-hour period. Trust me, that did not occur last year. That had previously occurred in the late 1980s. But when you add to the lightning strikes, the fact you have 150 plus million dead trees related to a 5+ year historic drought in the state of California, yes, I conclude climate change profoundly has impacted the reality that we're currently experiencing.
But hang on, Governor, which side are you on? You left out something else that happened this year. In April, you, Governor Newsom, ended the moratorium on fracking. And in July, you gave Chevron permission to frack wells in Kern County, which has some of the worst air in the country right now. You hold climate change accountable for these wildfires, but who is holding you accountable for waffling on fossil fuels? Instead of fracking those wells over and over, how about putting Californians to work, capping them? Then we would be clear about which side you're actually on. Up next, we will have Ellie Mae Hogan. We're going to talk to her a little bit about Wall Street's first CEO who is a woman. Is feminism is the path to fighting sexism over? That's up next on The Nomiki Show. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Ellie Mae O'Hagan, Ellie Mae O'Hagan is a regular contributor to The Guardian and an associate of Neon, a network of over 1,600 organizers across the UK that, quotes, built the strength of movements of economic, environmental, and social justice. Sounds like some great work you're doing right now and well-needed work. Ellie, thank you for joining the Nomiki Show. I guess I just want to start off with a big question. Is it time to pack it up? Are we done? Sexism's over?
No, we're never done. I wish it was. No.
So Wall Street, I'm sure you saw the news, just brought on its first female CEO. And we had booked you before this news came out, which is perfect because you did an article a few years ago in The Guardian talking about the gender equity gap, but specifically feminism without socialism is not really possible and will never cure our unequal society. And, you know, there's some real zingers in here about, you lead at the top of this article saying that scrolling through the list of FTSE 350 companies, one will find such as HSBC, which was fined $1.4 billion for helping drug cartels launder money in Mexico, Sports Direct, where workers have been exploited to the extent that one woman gave birth in toilets, and G4S, a company so mired in scandal that it has an entire Wikipedia page dedicated solely to the amount of controversies it has amassed. And you asked the question of the day, if a company behaves terribly but its director is a woman, is that still feminism? So here we are today with the CEO of Citibank, now a woman, and Wall Street and the New York Times say that the glass ceiling has been cracked. What is it going to take for society, for journalists, for people who are over the age of 40 maybe, to understand the ties between the feminist fight and the class struggle?
Well, I think that's the problem, isn't it? That's what's difficult about it, is that I think that article that I wrote was sort of in response to the pinkification, if you like, of International Women's Day. And I think that as feminism has become more and more prominent, with things like the Me Too movement, and there's been lots of feminist street movements over the last kind of 5-10 years, I think that the more mainstream iterations of feminism have kind of tried to argue that being feminism means being a woman, essentially. But I think that if you're talking about feminism just from the point of view of I'm a woman and I'm proud of that, but you're not talking about it in terms of what it means to have power and not to have power, and what it means to have power in relation to the people around you and the structures that you operate in, then really being a woman is no more of a useful identity than like being a stamp collector is. Do you know what I mean? It actually has to mean something in relation to the world. And so that's where, when you have somebody like, the CEO of Citibank being a woman, well, I'm sure that just as a woman, of course, she will have experienced sexism just as a woman in and of herself. There's no denying that. And I'm sure that she will have climbed the corporate ladder slower than a man in her position, of the same sort of class and race. But look at what Citibank did to the American people. And the people who suffered the most from the financial crisis were women. Right. And so to me, feminism means nothing unless it talks about the lives of the majority of women. And the majority of women in this world are poor, and they are women of color. So if your feminism isn't really talking about that, I just think it has extremely limited use. And that's why, for me, saying that a woman is the CEO of Citibank, I think that's just a very limited form of feminism. And I think that it's quite poor in its ambition. But going back to the question that you're asking, which is why people are finding this so hard, well, because if we start to talk about feminism in terms of power, then we start to talk about feminism in terms of capitalism. And then we have to start talking about what's wrong with capitalism. And most people who control discussions don't really want to do that because they are involved in institutions that benefit from capitalism. And I think that's the problem.
So, you said something very interesting in your piece, saying gender inequality may be a necessary condition of capitalism, but it is maintained by culture. I've never heard it said so well, because when we say culture, I'll lead down to another part of the piece where you mentioned the International Women's Day. Like, this was in response to International Women's Day essentially being co-opted by the greater feminist, whatever that movement is, the cultural feminist movement. So some of this is rooted in, I believe, the disconnection from specifically trade unions. And International Women's Day is something that grew out of, as you mentioned in the piece, it grew out of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fires here in New York, where it was led by women. It was a factory with women, young women, girls, and of course the labor movement that came out of that led by women. But somewhere in the mix, the trade part got out, and it became more about women's empowerment. So let's talk a little bit about how culture is used to shape how women are supposed to behave as feminists. What are some of the most jarring examples that you can think of that we may not necessarily associate with a way of preserving the cultural aspects of capitalism?
Well, if I understand do I understand your question right, to ask about how culture has sort of maintained capitalism? Is that what you're?
Yeah, I mean, when you're saying that feminism is the culture around feminism is actually becoming a tool of capitalism, like maintaining capitalism. The branding around
I think it's sort of I think it basically what it's doing is it's taking the bite out of feminism, right? Like it's making feminism into a sort of identity choice, into in the same way as, like, you might be able to express your kind of individual identity by buying a certain kind of coffee. You know, I buy a flat white with oat milk, and I'm a feminist. You know, and I think that like that, and the benefit of that to women is that it's not threatening. You know, if a woman can say I'm a feminist and that's kind of who I am, but not really talk about what that means in practice, then that's not threatening to men, and that's quite beneficial to women because, you know, men structurally as a class they control more things than women, so you don't really want to be threatening than men. But also in women's sort of interpersonal relationships with men are stronger and they can be more dangerous and they feel more entitled. Just, this is talking in very general terms, just your male viewers. I'm not saying every single man is like this. I'm just talking about how we're permitted to behave with one another in terms of our gender identities. So I think that like sort of mainstream feminism is quite appealing to women, to lots of women, because it enables you to sort of feel that you're being empowered and that you can make choices that are feminist, but you don't actually have to disrupt the sort of power structure that exists already, because doing that is quite scary. And, you know, that is where all the kind of stuff about feminists being man haters and all this kind of thing, and like, you know, and actually it being a bit of a dangerous thing for women to do, to come in. And so I think it is very appealing, the kind of feminism that like has been co-opted by capitalism. But the problem is that ultimately it's useless. And actually, interestingly, there are studies that show that women who tend to be feminist, who identify as feminist, tend to have more positive views of men than women who don't. And I think that's because women who really think about feminism and sort of integrate it into their lives, first of all, surround themselves with really like good men, and second of all, are able to understand what's going on in their lives and their relationships with men in a structural way, rather than being just frustrated about their kind of interpersonal relationships. So yeah, I think that like on the one hand it is appealing to women to sort of have this very safe form of feminism, but on the other hand it's useless, and I feel like it will ultimately it does more harm than good to women.
So what are some ways we can integrate the conversation around class issues and inequity back into the feminist equation? I mean, this is, even unions have sort of disconnected these two things. Even the feminist fights of you know, the 60s and 70s were geared around reproductive rights, which there's a very serious argument to be made about, you know, that tied into class. I mean, who are the ones who are at risk the most? Of course, most vulnerable members of our society, poor women and women of color and undocumented women who are, especially in red states here in the U.S. How do we weave that back into the conversation? How do the feminists that understand that this is an intersectional battle and it's not, you know, based on whatever the brand is or whatever the electoral fight is of that moment, or in opposition to Republicans even, how do we bring that into like the mainstream so that we can actually make some progress?
Well, I think first of all, you're absolutely right to talk about trade unions. You know, I think the whole basis of trade unions is this sort of unequal power imbalance between the worker and the boss. And the majority of people in this world who are in work are women, and those women are concentrated in low-paid, low-status jobs. So organising those women, giving them collective power, or supporting them to take their own collective power, is absolutely cannot happen without that. I also think, you know, I know this is particularly difficult in America, but I also think the question of welfare is extremely important, because obviously women are the main carers, and they do rely on public services much more than men. They need healthcare more than men do. They tend to be the primary carer of children, so they rely on education, childcare services. And of course, women need to escape violent relationships more often than men do, and so they need places to go, and they need money. You know, there's a great book by two sex workers called Revolting Prostitutes, that make the point that the majority of women go into sex work because they want to get money. And I think often it is that simple. Give women money. That's a really good way of being a feminist, you know, like create structures and systems and ways that women can get money, because when you live in a capitalist society, if you don't have money, you don't really have very much. So I think that's, you know, looking at ways to do that, but then also making sure that feminism is relevant to most women's lives, not just middle class white women's lives, which I think is a problem with contemporary feminism. Particularly, I can't really speak for America as much as here, but definitely in Britain that is a problem. You know, so talking about the issues that matter to most women, so childcare, work, pay, welfare, housing, these are feminist issues. You know, there's no way that you can talk about these issues without understanding that the majority of people who need to deal with this stuff are women.
Absolutely. And I mean, the housing crisis in New York, for instance, I'll just throw out a little piece of information I learned a few years ago. We have public housing in New York. It's the number one housing provider. In fact, with every single person who lives in public housing in New York City, it would equal the size of Boston. So when you think about public housing, and majority are people of color who live in public housing in New York City, and it is the only area where they're female-led homes. And so we started to dig into it a little bit more, talk about the intersectionality of other issues. Black and brown communities, because of the crime laws in the U.S., 1 in 3 black men were put in jail. Now, if you've gone to jail, you cannot return to public housing. That is against the law. So suddenly these homes are being led by women solely, and many, many homes, hundreds of thousands, solely, and families are literally being pulled apart from each other. So, you know, all these issues kind of overlap with each other. And I think, you know, obviously by design, I mean, there's redlining in this country. So white feminists just may not even be aware of how structurally difficult it is for women who do not make as much as they do or don't live in the same neighborhood. So it's interesting. I find it, I'm glad that this is a conversation that's coming up more, and white women are having, feminists are able to talk about their white feminism more. But what do you think are some ways to speak to more of the pussy hat wearing feminists out there, the pink hat, and bring them into a conversation about class and really challenging their own class, their own privilege?
That's a really, I would. Am I allowed to swear on this show?
Sure. I don't know if we get banged.
If I knew the
I actually don't know.
I would. Yeah. Well, let me see if I can put it in PG-13 terms. Then, if I knew how to win around white middle class feminists, there would be more of them would like me. I tend to get on their nerves with talking about this stuff. I mean, I think the first thing to say is to amplify the voices of women of colour. And I mean, in this country, we have a problem with transphobia in our feminist movement. So I would say also, particularly this country, trans women, and then also sex workers. And I don't just mean that in terms of representation. I mean that also because, and I hope this doesn't sound too patronising, but I actually think those groups have much more interesting and informative feminism than white middle class women, because they have the experience of being excluded from what, you know, the definition of woman, which is usually implicitly white, cisgendered, middle class. And, you know, especially like when it comes to sex workers, they are so on the sharp end of patriarchy that they really know what they're talking about. And I always feel like I learn so much more from listening to those people than I do from listening to middle-class white women. And I think one of the big reasons for that is that they tend to talk about women as real people inhabiting the world, whereas I feel that sort of mainstream feminism, kind of white feminism, talks about women as symbols quite a lot, you know, rather than talking about the lived reality of women's lives. So I think that the first thing is to really like read those people, amplify them, and sort of share what they have to say. But I think, you know, in terms of getting white feminists to acknowledge their class, I think the first thing for those of us wanting that to happen is to understand that they do stand to lose quite a lot. because patriarchy is rubbish. It's not nice. It's not nice to be on the receiving end of the bad stuff that patriarchy dishes out. And when you're white and middle class, you can shield yourself a lot from that. And so there's quite a lot of incentive for white middle class women to sort of stick to where they are. And of course, in America, you can see that in the sort of legacy of, and in this country as well, but I think it's talked about more in America, that you can see that with the history of white women often aligning themselves with white men at the expense of women of color. So they side with their race over their gender. You saw that in the last election with white women voting Trump more than Clinton, which really shows something, right? Because she really worked the whole "I'm a woman" thing, and yet,
And into that point, just if I can interject for 1 second, what really was lost in that conversation was these are white women who the majority were voting with their partners, male partners in particular. So what you just said, they side with gender. I don't know if it was necessarily because it was something that Hillary said. It was more that their partners, traditionally, who they vote with anyways, were voting for Trump.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I don't feel familiar enough with the way that the American electorate works to comment on that. But in this country, it's definitely the case that I did some work on this last year, that women would vote with their partners because they didn't feel very confident in terms of their political knowledge. So they would kind of just go along with what their partners were saying, particularly if they lived in quite traditional structures. So there was a sense that the man was the sort of head of the household. And then, they would vote together. They would drive to the voting booth together. And then that would exacerbate this idea of, I should just vote with how he's voting. But what I also noticed is that women, on the whole, tend to be more interested in their communities and more interested in their relationships and their connections than men. And so that is one possible way of kind of driving a wedge between women and voting in a right-wing way, is encouraging them to think, and I think maybe this could work with feminism, encouraging women to think about the political issues in terms of their own relationships and their own communities, because that was something that I picked up last year when I was doing public opinion work, is that on politics in this country, is that women were much more likely to think about, their local doctor's surgery, or the kind of the local council and how all of that was going when they were thinking about politics than men were.
I mean, some of this, I always find, I love going to Europe, pretty much anywhere in Europe, and going to bookstores, because there's just an array of different type of writing, and some of this is just because of the corporate structures of bookstores in our country. Obviously local bookstores are better, but I'm always blown away by how much feminist work is at bookstores. I was in Greece last year, and and it was an English bookstore, English writing, and there was a whole section dedicated to socialist feminist work. I am not kidding you. And much of that is out of the UK, and I say this because when I came back here, I was why is it so hard? I have to go to a university. I have to, why is it so hard to find great work here? It's just not released with the same channels. And through that research, I found out that there's very little actual research, polling, research institutes that focus on gender and class together. Mm-hmm. So one little example is, when you run for office in America, it's very expensive, right? We don't have enough women in office. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of organizations focused on electing more women into office, reaching parity. And yet the number one factor, number one obstacle for women running is raising money. And so I went to the renowned institute that studies this, and I said, could you give me some research on what are some of the struggles, why are some of the research on women raising money and running for office? And they said, well, actually, we haven't even done that. This is the number one barrier to women running for office. You haven't done any. You've done all of this other research about what they should wear. Should they wear pointy shoes? Should they wear earrings on camera? Should they lean in? Should they lean out? It was crazy talk, and they hadn't connected the dots, or they didn't want to connect the dots. And so I bring this up because it just seems like so much of this is obvious, but because reporters aren't reporting on it through the lens of not having the research available, you were talking about looking at public polling and how voting is influenced by your partner if you're in a more traditional home. What is it going to take for us to develop the capacity, develop the infrastructure so that it's not just a theory anymore? And it's not a theory. Obviously, people have been talking about these issues for decades, Bolsheviks, as you mentioned in your piece. What is it going to take for the mainstream to connect the dots? Like, how do we develop that infrastructure? I don't mean like traditional infrastructure. Like, what are the kinds of conversations we need to have with reporters and with leaders so that they get it?
I mean, I think shame is quite a good tool here.
Good.
You know, I think the way that I think people tend to just do things that they can get away with until, like powerful people, until somebody comes along and embarrasses them. So I think the way that I would want to go about something like that is by organizing women at a grassroots level and then demanding the infrastructure is built, because I don't think it's going to happen any other way, because at the moment the majority of people in power are white middle class men, and that just suits them just fine. So they need to feel some kind of outside pressure and kind of embarrassment and fear in order to change. So that's how I would do that personally. I think there is also a problem of both seeing women as nothing more than women. So basically seeing, like, I think that, when you say they hadn't even thought of fundraising, I think, that's because there's this idea that, women will need to think about their outfits because they're women, but not about money, like, so it's sort of seeing women as women, like, and not just kind of human beings that need, like, the fully rounded human beings that need, like, all of the other stuff that anybody would need if they were going to run for office. And I think that's another problem as well.
My last question is, I mean, you have a vibrant trade union movement in the UK. It's imperfect. How do we bring these conversations back into the trade union movement so that they are able to communicate when they talk about housing justice or fair wages or worker protections? It's not just the female-led unions that talk about it related to gender.
I mean, that's a really difficult question. I'm such a sucker for unions. I just love the trade unions. So it hurts to criticize them, but yeah, there is a problem. Of course, it's a problem. You can see that in most of the unions in the Western world. You can see that the majority of the people that they represent are women, but the majority of the people at the top of the union tend to be men. So of course, it's a problem. And I think from my experience I worked with the union movement in the UK for sort of 5 years in various different ways, and I still do consult for unions off and on. And one story to share is that there was a trade union in this country that was sort of represents workers in the fossil fuel industry, and was kind of on the fence about whether to support fracking or not. And lots of the members who didn't work in the fossil fuel industry organised themselves, went to the union's annual conference and managed to pass a motion to be anti-fracking. And it took a while for the wheels to turn, but now the union is anti-fracking and it supports anti-fracking measures. And actually at last year's Labour conference, it supported the Green New Deal and supported a net zero target by 2030, which is very ambitious. Right. This is a union that represents people in fossil fuels. So I think what I do like about unions, and they do have imperfections, I'm definitely not denying that, but what I do like about them is they are actually quite democratic. So I think if you join one as a member and you go to the meetings and you go to the conferences, I mean, they can be quite boring, but they are also the place where the democracy happens. And if you can organise enough people, you can change things in unions. You can force the union to do something. And I think it's much easier to get stuff like that done in a union than it is in a kind of corporation or a media company, for example. So, that's what I would do.
For example, yes, definitely hard to do that. Having gone through many of those rounds with other media companies, that is correct. It is not easy to do at a media company. Ellie Mayo-Hagan, great work. We will post your article up and recent work up as well. Hope to have you back on and get some rest. The time difference is real there right now. So.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Up next, we have our radical feminist panel. We'll be talking to Jamie Peck. We'll talk to Jamie Peck, of course, from the Majority Report and the Intifada podcast. And next, we also have Violet Ray, who is the chair of the Rose Caucus. And she's on staff for the Socialist Rifle Association. I'm kind of curious about that, so I'm going to try to fit that question. If not, we'll have her back on. All right, we'll be back in a second. Thanks for watching and listening to The Nomiki Show. But remember to click like and subscribe on YouTube, and please share on social media. If you're not already a patron, please join us for as low as $5 a month on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show for early and special content. That investment makes a huge difference. We are not corporate media raking in the dough. It's really you guys that are keeping us going. So please consider being a patron. And to our current patrons, thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful to you. We also now have swag. So check us out on thenomikishow.com to get your mugs, your totes, and your stickers. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Look at this professional here with her professional mic. Our friend Jamie Peck. Jamie, you're on mute, just as a heads up.
Hello. Professional.
So professional. Jamie Peck is, of course, the host of the Intifada, and she is producer extraordinaire on the Majority Report, well-known face on the Majority Report. What's up? How are you?
I'm all right. What am I doing? My good friend is having like a little tiny birthday gathering at a hotel later, so I'm excited for that.
It's very ambitious.
Yeah, and I am going upstate this weekend to have a good time in the woods. So I'm excited to talk a little more politics, and then I'm excited to GTFO.
I don't blame you. I also am doing the same thing this weekend, thank God. So, Jamie, we were dealing with a little bit of a technical issue, as I'm sure you know. We're waiting for Violet Ray to come in, but you're a communist, and I wanted to bring this question up with our last panelist because she mentioned it in her article, but I thought the quote was so powerful, and I wanted to ask you about it. Inessa Armand, the Bolshevik revolutionary who was responsible for allowing Soviet women to divorce, have abortions, participate in politics, and access childcare, knew that only fundamental change to the economic system could make life better for women. That is what our previous guest mentioned in her article in The Guardian, Ellie Mae O'Hagan. But she said, there's this great quote, if women's liberation is unthinkable without communism, then communism is unthinkable without women's liberation. You're a communist. What flavor of communist are you, and how do you weave that into your feminism?
Well, first of all, I think that's very true. I believe all forms of liberation need to go hand in hand, which includes gender oppression, racial oppression, class oppression. It's all woven together in a very shitty basket of society, to use a terrible metaphor.
Basket of deplorable society, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. What flavor of communist am I? I'm sort of a non-denominational communist, non-sectarian communist. I think it's really important to look at all the different traditions and what they have to offer us. But I also think that we need a new synthesis because we are living under historically unique circumstances. That said, I certainly am more on the anti-authoritarian end of things. I know I probably shouldn't use the A word because that's like very loaded, but whatever. Sorry, Tankies. I'm sort of an anti-state, anarchist adjacent kind of communist. I think everything should be as flat as possible in my ideal society. No unjustified hierarchies. Probably a combination of central planning and things that can be done in a local and decentralized way. So I've been inspired by all different communist traditions, though, from traditional Leninism to some real galaxy brain shit like communization theory.
So how does this with your perspective in the world, how does this weave into like the immediate situation we're facing with feminists, in which there's this like branded approach to feminism that we were talking about in the last segment, and then there's just like the reality that more women than probably in the last 100 years are facing economic consequences without any, with fewer protections. So like, how does it kind of bridge the gap between, CEO Wall Street feminism and like current state of the economic crisis, and how women are literally like starving and being kicked out of their homes and, being separated from their children at the border? How does your form of feminism deal with that?
God, there are so many crushing problems facing us right now. And I think, no leftist politics worth anything would ignore all of the incredibly urgent problems that are facing the working class. Certainly, socialist feminism is it's something we can use. It's a living ideology, and we are always learning more and incorporating our experiences and our knowledge into our praxis, if I may use a fun meme word, hashtag praxis, unity of theory and practice. So what are some things we are I don't know. Maybe I should give some examples. How about that?
Sure.
So something like Medicare for All, which the Socialist Feminist Working Group of NYCDSA has been working on for a while, is extremely related to both feminism and socialism, right? Because women particularly, and non-men, I should say, their dependency on both bosses and on husbands is greater when they rely on these people for healthcare. So if we gave everybody healthcare for free as a right, you could see how that would increase the independence of women and decrease their dependency on men and bosses and whoever.
Right. I think we have Violet. Is she in? Can we bring her in? Pause for this little break. Hello, Violet. Violet Ray is one of the founders and leaders of the Rose Caucus. Thanks for joining us, for dealing with our Zoom issues.
Oh, no, that's completely fine. Thank you for having me.
Violet, meet Jamie. Jamie, Violet. This is like a virtual meeting. So Violet, as one of the, the founders of the Rose Caucus, are socialists doing enough right now in DSA and the Rose Caucus, enough to weave class and gender dynamics together? And what can folks do? Because you're doing a lot of electoral work. What can they do at the electoral level to kind of make that, transform the message on the ground with voters?
I don't really believe that we've been doing enough for socialism in general. I think that in a lot of places we get our message really mixed in with what we believe that moderates want or what they might compromise with us on. But at the end of the day, anybody who's asking us to water down our basic needs are not our friends. Mm-hmm. So we really have to work on making sure that as we're organizing with people who want the same things as us, so that we're not constantly being asked, to compromise away the things that we need. So as far as what that looks like in electoral politics, it's organizing with people who really are genuinely on the same page as you. And unfortunately, in some cases, that means doing a little bit of gatekeeping, doing a little bit of research to make sure that the people coming in to do things like forum platform policy or who are coming in to fight for different things are all on the same page as far as what they want and what their demands are, so that we have clear, concise statements as socialists and as leftists.
So that's a really interesting question, because, let's look at it in terms of feminism for a second, and, you've got the pussy hat wearing crowd of feminists. You have the Wall Street, I don't even know, maybe they're the same, I'm not really sure. I don't dance in that room, but, you've got, the Wall Street CEO types you were talking about at the top, where we have our first, we're done, guys, no more work. Achievement unlocked. Our first CEO that's a female of a Wall Street bank, Citigroup, who just has done great things for women over the years. So, do we need to actually have them on board with us? Should we, is there a message that we have, while staying pure to our values, that will start to loop in, our moms who may not have been able to recognize, their white privilege or capitalism is essentially the patriarchy? Is there a message that you guys think is, a great tool to bring in that crowd?
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry. I believe very firmly that we should never abandon any opportunity that we have to educate people and bring them further left. And that most of the time means speaking them to issues that are intersectional, things like, climate change, which affects all of us, things like, workers' rights and healthcare, these class issues, these, gender struggles. A lot of these have intersectionality.
Right.
But I don't think that when we're talking about our organizing spaces and the things we're calling for policy-wise, that it is the appropriate time to compromise with people who are to our right, frankly. We only have one planet. We're, in the middle of a global pandemic right now, and 12 million people just got evicted.
Yeah.
So we're dealing with, many intersecting crises at once. And it's really important that when we're sitting down and talking about how we're going to fight electorally for these things, that we're asking for the big things that we actually need and not watering down our needs to appeal to the more moderate in our society. Because the more that we're talking about this, the more that we're bringing this conversation into the mainstream, the more it normalizes it, and the more that it brings that window to the left. And then we're having discussions not just about defunding the police, but about abolishing the police. So we're asking for the big stuff first, because that's what we actually need.
Jamie?
Yeah, so I have some thoughts on how to radicalize the libs. I guess I have kind of a soft spot for them, because I used to be a liberal, like many people who identify as leftists now. you know? And the first way that I was really politicized was through an interest in feminism. And I was a liberal feminist because that was the water that I was swimming in. But I think once you become interested in feminism, if you are a thinking person, you take a look at like the stuff I was just talking about, like, you know, what would really help women to stand up against the abuse of men in their lives? Well, you need material support for yourself. You need material support for your children, if you have any. And, you know, it kind of gets you thinking in broader ways. Like, you don't always know what's going to radicalize somebody. You don't always know what door it's going to come in through, which is part of why it's so important for any socialist movement worth anything to be concerned with every different kind of struggle, to be intersectional, if you will. But I think, everyone should be welcome in our coalition. Like, I don't hate the Pussy Hat ladies. I think they're better than the Trump people, and I think it's like pretty messed up when people act like they're just as bad. Like when somebody identifies as a liberal, that kind of cracks the door open to them saying like, oh, I empathize with people who are less privileged than myself. I'm imagining them as a rich liberal because, you know, that's the type that exists in my head when we talk about pussy ladies. You know, not all pussy hat ladies. Maybe some of them come from the working class. I don't know. But like, you know, you crack the door open. They say they care about other people. And then that leads to, oh, well, if you really care about people and you really want people to have health care, why don't you support the Medicare for All candidate? Things of that nature. And it can get more complicated from there. I'm using sort of simple examples on purpose because I am tired. But
it's the old line of meeting people where they are. So like, you know, if we, I mean, my entrance point to the Bernie campaign specifically, not to challenging capitalism, was literally, I was on TV one day losing my mind debating Hillary Clinton superdelegate, like chair of some sort of committee, who is a major lobbyist, and she's talking about how great Hillary is for feminism. And I was like, she doesn't even support the $15 minimum wage. Are you kidding me? You want to empower women? Start with the $15. And that was my moment. I just cracked. And then the next day, I became a surrogate for Bernie Sanders, officially. Yeah, I mean, they didn't have a surrogate program yet, but that was like the first surrogate program was. It just, I mean, that was it. I was like, I can't sit here and find myself. It's just, and it was a great conversation. If you remember those moments when Madeleine Albright said there's a special place in hell for women who don't support other women. It's like, yeah, there is. Maybe you should follow that. It's like in policy too. So, you know, I think this is a really big conversation to have in terms of like, how do you, what are those little entrance points, especially for those our mothers, like, you know, a little bit of the 70s era feminism that probably do see themselves as feminists and, you know, might even be willing to challenge their own class. But fundamentally, I think, you know, you had a really good point a second ago about, Violet, about the like not compromising at all in those rooms. And I think like once you involve capitalism into the conversation, once you involve money, the best way to win an argument is to be like, well, this is where the money, like, you want to talk about women and empowerment, well, then why is it like women are still making this much? And it's because, you know, you follow the money, it's because of this. So it's just like so clear cut that there's like no room for compromise. How can you be a feminist and not support the $15 minimum wage when most low-wage workers are women?
I think there's an easy solution to this. I think it's a matter of we just need more women running for office. And thankfully, you know, Rose Caucus this last cycle had the pleasure of endorsing many candidates, but two of them, through their own hard work and dedication and just their absolute clear and unique voices, have made it, two Democratic candidates have made it to their general ballots. And we are so excited to have two of them on ballot that are advocating our socialist values, as well as bringing their own strong platforms that are tailored to the needs of their constituents. So those two people, let me just name drop really quick for them because they are wonderful and they deserve it. We have Hillary Turner out in West Virginia in Congressional District 3. And we have Angelica Dueñas out in California's 29th Congressional District. And they are both mothers, they are both feminists, and they are both extremely great advocates for not only our platform, but for the people that they hope to represent.
It's awesome. Check out Rose Caucus when you get a chance. We'll put it up in the chat. Jamie, final thoughts on, like, ending sexism.
Oh my God.
We're gonna do a lot of these panels, guys. This isn't gonna be like let's solve everything in 20 minutes.
It's such a big topic. I mean,
this is an introduction. This is an orientation to our very, very, very male audience.
I have some ideas on how we could solve everything quickly, but I don't think anyone's ready for that yet.
Let's ease them in.
We'll keep those hidden.
I mean, same. I've been reading a lot of communization theory lately, but maybe we'll save that for the second or the third one. I don't know.
Let's ease them into it.
Yeah. How do we solve sexism? Well, I mean, one thing that actually my caucus is all about. Shout out to Emerge. It's a communist caucus out of New York City of DSA. Is look, we live in a sexist patriarchal society. And the left, the organized left, is not immune from these dynamics. And if we don't put active measures and practices in place to counteract them, they're still going to be there in our leftist spaces, and it's going to suck. So it's really important for organizations like DSA to have policies in place to encourage the participation of everyone who is not a straight white man, and I think we have some good ones. I think we could do even better. I think more broadly, in the same way that I think racial justice is the key to unwinding capitalism, especially right now, gender justice has a role to play as well, especially when you look at a thing called social reproduction. So basically, everything that happens outside of the traditional workplace that reproduces the working class, the workers, from day to day and from generation to generation, so they can keep on going back to work. Social reproduction, it's a thing that capitalism runs on. In an earlier phase of capitalism, capital at least acknowledged that it benefits from all of this unwaged labor that largely women are doing, and included the price of this in something called the family wage. Now, in the neoliberal era, the capitalists have been able to shift more and more of the responsibility for social reproduction onto the individuals themselves, and they will continue to squeeze us however they can. However, I think a lot of the key struggles that we are going to see in the present and the near future are going to be in the realm of social reproduction.
Interesting.
And the traditional workplace is certainly important, but the demand for labor is dropping. Unemployment is rising. So I think we are going to see a lot of struggles around social reproduction, both waged in terms of teachers and nurses and all of these pink-collar jobs that, certainly, that, care for everyone and keep society running, as well as, outside of the workplace, like struggles around the price of food, struggles around the price of housing. This could all be considered within the realm of social reproduction, which is an incredibly feminized realm because, throughout history, women have been in charge of keeping the house, raising the children, et cetera, et cetera. So I think any socialist worth anything at all would be foolish to ignore these issues and these struggles and the role that feminism is going to play.
Right. And on top of that, now you have to teach your kids 7 hours a day while you're working. So figure that one out.
Yeah, mine just started homeschool on top of everything else. So it's been very exciting.
We have a lot more to talk about. I would love to have you guys back on and do another one of these panels if you're down for it. We'll pick a theme, and then we'll stick to that theme. It'll be like housing and women, Medicare for all and women, like some sort of, I don't know, we'll figure it out. All gender justice issues, but theme it out so it's not so broad. But great orientation to radical feminism. I hope we've radicalized a few of you.
If not, we'll come back for more.
We will. Thanks, guys. Shout out to Rose Caucus and Antifada. And Matriarch on our side, we have one candidate who is left in their prime. Well, actually, we have two candidates. Cori Bush, who's likely to win her election. She's in a very Democratic district. But Marquita Bradshaw, who's the nominee for the Democrats in Tennessee for the Senate, U.S. Senate, can win back that seat. She is running an incredible race. Check her out, Matriarch candidate. And, of course, Matriarch is an organization supporting working class women running for office, progressive working class women. All right, guys, thanks. Hope to see you next time. And to our chat. All right, we have Harley Morency, who says, "Hey, Nomiki, love your show. What are your thoughts on Nick Branagh's idea for the Movement for People's Party?" Wow, it's okay. I will address that. That's a big question. I promise I'm going to turn that into a speech, because I do think, listen, we need to be pressuring the existing two-party system from all sides. As Jim Hightower said, I Instagrammed this today. Jim Hightower said, "We don't have two parties, we have one party." And that's the truth. We have one party. I do think that we need to fight electorally, but there is an opportunity in many states to run as a third party candidate. And I think if that is the path, really it has to be the most hyper-local, granular organizing possible, because those are usually ballot fights. So it really depends on the state. I think at a national level, it's right now it's a little it could be disruptive to have a third party candidate, which is not happening this election. I'm not saying that. But I think, it's doable locally. It happened that we have many parties in New York State. So, and people have won on those parties and those parties alone. But they're also sometimes a weapon for one party to team up with the other and build a coalition. So great question. Thanks to Rye, R-Y, and of course, Bob, our moderator. Thank you guys so much. We are going to be doing a special tribute show tomorrow talking about 9/11 in New York. We're going to have Harry Siegel, who is a longtime New York reporter. He is an old friend of mine. He is, I think he's national editor at the Daily Beast, and he is a columnist at the Daily News here in the city. Great writer. And we're going to have Josh Fox, who, of course, is a climate activist. He has many documentaries around fracking and climate change. But earlier in his career, he created beautiful art, theater pieces in the wake of 9/11 here in New York City, which is where he was. And then we're also going to have Joshua Kahn Russell, who's going to talk about his organizing post 9/11, really after we started to go into the two wars, the endless wars. So you're definitely going to want to check that out. It's going to be a big show. And for patrons, you definitely want to join us on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show, because they're going to stick around for another segment, and that will be available to patrons only. Thank you to everybody today. Great week. I think we're doing this. So far, so good. But thank you to you all, and we will see you tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for watching and listening to The Nomiki Show. But remember to click like and subscribe on YouTube, and please share on social media. If you're not already a patron, please join us for as low as $5 a month on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show for early and special content. That investment makes a huge difference. We are not corporate media raking in the dough. It's really you guys that are keeping us going. So please consider being a patron. And to our current patrons, thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful to you. We also now have swag. So check us out on thenomikishow.com to get your mugs, your totes, and your stickers.